from the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee. I'm Charles Purcell, and this is a bonus episode of The Log. It's Friday, April 26, and as soon as I posted the previous episode, I immediately regretted not spending more time on the university protests over Israel. I thought, I really should have spent more time. There are things to say. So I decided to make a little bonus episode here. And then also, that very next day was the ridiculous, outrageous oral arguments at the Supreme Court regarding presidential immunity. So I'm going to cover those two issues today. I just couldn't wait. I couldn't wait until next week. So it's gotten so out of hand. Of course, the student protests you're seeing on the news, and the news is, as usual, providing a great disservice to you. And there are lots of angles and lots of thoughts that need to be expressed here. So first of all, of course, the protests have now spread first to Yale, then NYU, and Berkeley, and University of Texas, Austin, USC, and now just all over the nation. First of all, free speech. The right wing is always hollering about free speech and at the same time mocking and deriding students who they call snowflakes, and they're afraid of free speech, and they don't want to be made to feel uncomfortable. And that's what they're doing now. They don't want Jewish students to feel uncomfortable. And as far as I can see, that's kind of the extent of it. They are brazenly lying about anti-Semitism. If there was anti-Semitism just running rampant, as they claim, well, we'd see it. The news cameras would pick it up. We all saw in Charlottesville the Unite the Right rally. Remember that back in 2017? Nazis openly marching, Nazi paraphernalia, Confederate flags, chanting, "Jews will not replace us." And Republicans said nothing. And their great leader actually called them good people. They're good people on both sides. We all remember that. So all this hand-wringing about anti-Semitism is just a lie for various reasons. One, the right wing hates universities in general. They want to either destroy them, and if they can't destroy them, they want to control them. Anything that whiffs of reasonable, multiracial academic freedom, they are just inherently opposed to. And they are perfectly willing to just be 100% hypocritical, to lie. The kind of language that Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, was using when he addressed the students of Columbia was just over the top, calling them rabid, radical anti-Semites. Again, we'd see it. If it was there, we'd see it and we'd hear it like we did in Charlottesville. Out of all this coverage, all I've seen is one person, and I don't know if they were a student or a member of the community. I couldn't even tell if it was a man or a woman. Just one kind of grainy shot of a person standing silently, holding a sign saying that you are the next victims, referring, I guess, to the October 7th. Yeah, that's a terrible thing. Yes, it is. Absolutely, that's a terrible thing. One person standing silently, we don't know who they are. Are there some anti-Semitic thoughts and slogans being thrown around? Yeah, probably. I'm sure there are. But just like we learned from the Black Lives Matter protests back in 2020, and we've had plenty of time now to know the truth about that, any violence, any violent rhetoric did not come from the protesters. Now, I don't want to get off on a tangent here, but this needs to be made clear. We've had plenty of time. Investigative reporters, academic researchers, police departments themselves have all analyzed all the data from the summer of 2020. And the most extreme behavior was coming from outsiders, a handful of outsiders, some from just people in the neighborhood who lost their heads and just started rioting. And that happens. Riots happen. And some buildings and some cars were set ablaze. That happens in riots. I'm not condoning it. I'm also not condemning it. Was Martin Luther King, I forget the exact quote, violence is the language of the oppressed or something like that. Sometimes people just lose it. But the organized protests, the people holding the signs, the people doing the organizing, the people getting the permits to march, the people with the megaphones, the people making the speeches, Black Lives Matter and their supporting organizations were not the ones creating the violence. It was a handful of hangers-on and, more importantly, the police response, creating these walls of militarized police, corralling protesters into areas smaller and smaller, marching in on them, using violence. We're seeing that exact same thing today. So to label these student protesters as violent, radical anti-Semites is just an obscene lie. So far, it's been students only. There has been some call I've seen from outside organizations encouraging their members to support the students, and there's been some of that. I know that was an issue at Columbia as part of their so-called negotiations with the students that, okay, this need to be student protests only. We don't want outsiders coming in on campus. All right, there's one little detail. I'm not going to quibble with that. But given the response from the right wing and the horrible, damaging lies they're telling and the issue itself, yeah, I think it is time that all of us support the students and hit the streets. Another thing the news media is not spending enough time on is the actual issue itself. A quick little note from just the last week or two. One is Israeli strike in southern Gaza. There's been so much talk about attacking Rafah. That full-blown invasion hasn't happened yet, but there was an attack in Rafah that killed 22 civilians, 18 of which were children. And then right on the heels of that, they discover this mass grave at the hospital. Remember the hospital that just got leveled, the Nasser Medical Complex in Khan Yunis, southern Gaza? They discovered a mass grave, and they're still counting. It's up to, I think, close to 400. I have to check. Maybe it's over. But last I heard, up to close to 400 bodies discovered, including children, young men, older women, some of them with their hands tied behind their backs, executed. Others indicated they were buried alive. This is what's going on and continues to go on. And what do the student protesters want? They want this to end, and what they're demanding is divestment. Major universities are big-time investors in all sorts of sectors of the economy. They want their respective universities to divest from businesses doing business with Israel and from weapons manufacturers and those who profit from weapons. Divest. That's their demand. Sounds pretty reasonable. Sounds very similar to previous protests over the many decades. Student protests over apartheid in South Africa. Protests against the Vietnam War. All of which over time have been proven to vindicate the students. I often say, just why don't you listen to the students, listen to the progressives earlier. We're always right. We always wind up being right. One commentator I heard, excellent piece that one of my Facebook friends shared about how, universities have pictures up on the wall of student protesters from the 60s, and they brag about how liberal they are and how with it they are. going back to the 1950s and Martin Luther King and civil rights. And yeah, 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, you can brag about how enlightened you are. So, get a jump on it. Just support the students now. You're going to 20 years from now. You're going to brag about how progressive you are. You're going to pretend that you are on their side. The other thing about free speech, you can't be a free speech absolutist all the time. The whole fire in a crowded theater, and their hate speech is a thing, and there is something to be said about that. But there's nothing here I can find that precludes these students from practicing their right of free speech. And it takes on a special meaning when you're on a university campus. There's also such a thing as academic freedom. So I would argue that of all places to have a protest, a university is one of the most important places and effective places to have protests. You get the best experts in the world on every issue at these major universities. You could have massive teach-ins and seminars, and you could really discuss these issues. That's what university administrators ought to be doing instead of calling in the police or, with the help of the governor, as Abbott did in Texas, calling in the National Guard. Are we going to see a replay of Kent State at some point here? This is ridiculous. Talk to the students. Use this. Use this as an opportunity for all of us to learn, to talk. But instead, the rhetoric just gets crazier and crazier. So the students have every right to do what they're doing. If they engage in civil disobedience, refuse to disperse, that sort of thing. Yeah, the whole concept of civil disobedience, going all the way back to Thoreau, is, you just stay passive, and if they're going to arrest you, they arrest you. It's all part of the plan. It's all part of the process. It's all part of your cause. You get some publicity. Your voice is heightened when you're arrested. The cameras are on you now. I'm watching the coverage. I don't see any students throwing punches. All I see is them being abused by police. I don't see them throwing bottle rockets. It's not happening. Instead, we're just sort of kowtowing to this police state where the powers that be call the shots, and they're the ones who have the power to call in the cops, to call in the National Guard. The Gaza war is only getting worse and worse with every news cycle. The students have every right, and not just the right, but the responsibility. It's their heritage. It's U.S. history. It's our great national tradition to protest. And that's what's happening. And going back to the accusations of anti-Semitism, if they were there, we'd see them, like we saw them in Charlottesville. I'm not seeing them. Show me. Tell me I'm wrong. All I'm hearing are accusations. Show me. This cynical McCarthy-era weaponization of anti-Semitism is just despicable. A few months ago, we had the university presidents being bullied by congressional committees. Happened again with the president of Columbia, Shafiq, being bullied, and she took it. She kowtowed. And you and I have talked about this before. The reason that crazy right-wingers are just head over heels in love with Israel, well, today I think it has a lot to do with the fact that Netanyahu is decidedly just over-the-top right-wing in everything that entails. So there's that. But primarily, again, we've talked about this, the crazy right-wingers, the Christian ethno-nationalists, believe that Israel has to be where they are in order to fulfill prophecy. It's all about being saved. It's all about end times. I mean, it's all about this insane, wackadoodle, radical religious hoo-ha that they believe. So yeah, the Jews have to have Israel. They have to control it right where they are because that fulfills prophecy that will enable end times, and they can all fly into the sky and be saved. This is what they believe. They don't give a damn about Jews. In fact, when they're flying up in the sky to meet their Savior, the Jews are going to burn in hell. That's how much they care about the Jews. It's all part of the plan. The Jews are just tools. So don't talk to me about anti-Semitism. And what's their evidence for anti-Semitism? Slogans. From the river to the sea. My God, just get over that. It's a phrase that goes way back. It's been used on both sides. People use it to mean whatever they want it to mean. For some people, it means the annihilation of all Palestinians. That's when the radical Zionists say it. When the radical Arabs say it, then it's annihilation of the Jews. But when most Palestinians say it today, and if they chant it at these protests, it just means that Palestinians should be free. They should be free people. They should have equal rights from the river to the sea. It's pretty basic. So that, just toss that phrase. It doesn't mean anything because it means everything, depending on who's saying it and what context. Now, I'm going to make it very clear that I am not anti-Semitic. To be anti-Semitic is just stupid. It's just being a racist. It's just to be anti-Semitic or to be anti-black or anti-woman, or it's just, there are very few people. There are too many, way too many. Again, let's go back to Charlottesville, who would fit that description. I think a lot of people. Well, I'll speak for myself. All right, I'll speak for myself, and I just, let's do a little checklist and see if you agree with any of this. I myself, speaking for myself, I am anti-Israel. I am. They're doing terrible things. Their government is violent, right-wing. They're presiding over a genocide. They're presiding over apartheid. Everything about the Israeli state right now, I oppose. Doesn't make me an anti-Semite. That's crazy. Look at the protests. Half of them are Jewish. We got a bunch of Jewish student organizations as part of these protests. I am also anti-Zionist, where others are openly Zionist, including President Joe Biden, who, by the way, the White House just made a statement. I don't have it in front of me, but they are sharing in these terrible lies about the students. They're giving those lies credence. So, yeah, Joe Biden calls himself a proud Zionist. No, you know what? I'm not a Zionist because you can't be a Zionist and a small d Democrat. You can't be a Zionist and believe in equal rights. You can't believe in diversity and racial diversity and ethnic diversity and religious diversity. No. It means that one particular group rules everybody else in a state. So, no, I'm not a Zionist. Does that make me anti-Semitic? No. I'm pro-peace. I'm anti-apartheid. I'm anti-genocide. None of these things makes you anti-Semitic if you check any of these boxes. And again, the terms, the phrases, the slogans, river to the sea, self-described Zionists, the word intifada has come up a few times, and that's very similar to the from the river to the sea phrase. It could mean anything, depending on who's saying it. Intifada is a broad term. It can be defined a lot of ways. I got a question. What about all the people who say, I stand with Israel? Does that mean you're pro-genocide? I stand with Israel? I guess that must mean you're pro-genocide. I guess that means you're pro-murder. I guess that means you're pro-apartheid. Well, it must. I stand with Israel, and Israel is doing all these things. So should I label every single person who utters that phrase, should I label them as evil, genocidal murderers? Yeah, you can't fight over slogans. You can't fight over words. You gotta get to the issue. And especially Columbia University President Shafik is not allowing that to happen. She's not really engaging with the students, and she's kowtowing to the bullies of Congress to the right-wing bullies, and, let's be frank about it, rich donors. That's when things really start to move. That's what ousted the other two. I forget which ones. Harvard, who was ousted a couple months ago after they were bullied in Congress, mainly because of rich donors. They just saw to it. So just don't believe it. Just don't believe it, what you're hearing. All right, so I just needed to say this. So, again, you're listening to a bonus episode of The Log. I regretted after I posted yesterday's episode. Had to post it to meet the deadline. I immediately regretted not talking about this stuff. It's just too timely. Didn't want to wait. So, in that light, I also wanted to make a quick mention about yesterday's outrageous, ridiculous oral arguments at the Supreme Court. They actually took this case. We talked in the last episode about how the Supreme Court doesn't have to take cases that they don't want to take. They choose. And they choose to take cases that can help them push their right-wing agenda. That's just the fact of it right now. And there's no more glaring example than this: presidential immunity brought by the Orange Menace to try to get out of his January 6th case brought by Jack Smith, the federal case. There's no such thing as presidential immunity. It doesn't exist. It's just made up by the Orange Menace and his lawyers to get out of a jam. And the Supreme Court never should have taken this case. The judges at the appellate level, from which this case comes, they just pretty much laughed this thing out of court. It has no merit. 45 other presidents have managed to get through their terms and not be indicted, either during office or after leaving office. And suddenly there's this great need. Again, and completely fabricated by the Orange Menace. And yeah, the right-wingers on the Supreme Court are throwing them a rope. Regardless of how they decide this, the fact that they're hearing it at all is ridiculous. It just put a delay in the trial of several months. And now they had oral arguments yesterday. They won't rule until late June, early July. It'll be too late to get the trial going. So they pretty much guaranteed there's going to be no trial. Jack Smith is not going to bring this to trial before the election. It's not going to happen because they're probably not going to decide conclusively. All the experts I'm hearing are saying, well, it looks like they're going to throw this back to the lower courts, ask them to do some investigative findings to define what's a private act and what's a public act and all this BS. That's one of the arguments they're using, and one of the ways the Supreme Court can find some middle ground, so to speak. I don't think it's middle ground at all, but they're not going to say that a president has 100% complete immunity like the Orange Menace wants. He wants to be able to kill somebody on Fifth Avenue, and it's okay because I'm the president. They're not going to give him that. But they do have this ridiculous argument of, well, private acts, no immunity for that, but a public act, acting as president, yeah, you should have some immunity for that. No, you shouldn't. There's no such thing. The only immunity that exists is one memo written by some underling at the Justice Department several years ago that for some reason attorneys general since then have abided by this ridiculous idea that a president shouldn't be indicted while in office. So when you hear presidential immunity, that's the only place it currently exists. In an obscure memo written by a Justice Department underling that somehow gained footing. It's not a law. It's just a suggestion. It's a Justice Department policy. You remember Special Counsel Robert Mueller investigating the Orange Menace and Russia and the 2016 election and all that. He abided by that. Well, no, you can't indict a president, even though we found 10 indictable offenses. He said, well, no, because of this dopey little memo, I can't do it. He could. He just chose not to. And in his report, he practically begged Congress to impeach the guy, gave him a full, again, 10 discrete indictable offenses. He laid it right out in his report. that Barr and the press all lied about. So the point is, there's no such thing as immunity. The Supreme Court never should have taken this case. They've completely thrown the Orange Menace a lifeline. There's very little to no chance that the Jack Smith trial over the January 6th is going to go to court anytime soon. Certainly not before the election. So all you can do, voters, all you can do is just, keep him out of the White House with your vote. You can't rely on any court to help you out here. Nina Totenberg of NPR made a really interesting point. This morning she's talking about the case, talking about the oral arguments, and she pointed out that all 5 men on the Supreme Court, all 5 of them, served Republican presidents. And all of them are on record supporting the concept of a strong presidency. There's some debate in political theory about how powerful the presidency should be relative to the other branches of government. I myself believe that the president should be extremely weak. You and I have talked about this before. I think the president should basically be Miss America, just a figurehead, just somebody to go to foreign funerals, just somebody to sort of represent the nation, but not to have any real power. That's what I believe. I believe the power should be closer to the people. Representative, fine. Not certainly the way we have now, where the Senate is not representative of the people because of the ridiculous idea that each state gets 2 senators. Or the Electoral College, that has to go. So there are lots of things that have to be changed. But whatever the new design looks like, the people need to be represented. I'm a small d Democrat. Above and beyond everything else, I'm a small d Democrat. So no, I don't think the president should have any power at all. But in the current debate, where I don't have a voice, at least there's some conversation about how much power is concentrated in the executive and how much in the judicial and the legislative. And yeah, Nina Totenberg made that very interesting point that I didn't really realize. All 5 men on the court are on record and have all served Republican presidents. So, yeah, just a shame. Just an absolute, utter shame of what's happening right now. The court has to be reformed. The presidency has to be reformed. And above and beyond everything, we got to get through 2024 still hanging on by a thread of having some semblance of democracy in this country. Because really, we're just hanging by our fingernails on the ledge right now. All right. Okay, so again, this was a bonus episode. Next, if you're a subscriber, the next thing up on your feed will be Sunday morning. We'll post the next Charles Purcell Presents, which is a good one. I encourage you to look for that. It's all about fascism. And then we'll get back to our regular schedule. The log drops on Thursdays, and Charles Purcell Presents drops on Sundays. All right, there you go. Thanks a lot. We'll see you soon.